Okay, so Linkin Park. Honestly, they're like the soundtrack to everyone's like angst-ridden teenage years, right? Like you can't tell me you were blasting in the end at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're back. But it's not like a simple comeback tour, you know? There's a whole saga unfolding around their new co-lead singer, Emily Armstrong. And that's what we're diving into today in this deep dive.
Yeah, this is a lot more than just a band releasing a new album. We're talking about legacy, accountability, even like the role of, well, let's just say certain belief systems in the music industry.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. So we're looking at this article from The Independent. It's called Linkin Park Tour. Band is risking their entire legacy choosing Emily Armstrong, but it's their choice to make. And it really gets into like the heart of why this is such a complex situation. So before we jump into like all the drama, I think it's important to like rewind a bit, right? For anyone who might be like, Linkin Park, they were huge, okay? Like massive in the early 2000s, selling millions of albums, winning Grammys, like the whole nine yards. But of course, their story took a tragic turn when Chester Bennington, their lead singer, he died in 2017.
Yeah, and I think that's something we kind of have to address head on because, Bennington's voice, his lyrics, it was so raw, so emotional. It was like the heart and soul of Linkin Park,
Right.
Replacing him, I mean, it was always going to be like walking a tightrope, even without all this other stuff.
Totally. And, that brings us to Emily Armstrong. She's the vocalist for the band Dead Sara. And the band, they chose her to like share lead vocals. And honestly, at first people were like cautiously optimistic, like she's got this powerful voice, similar energy to Bennington in a way. And those early performances, they seem promising. But then, well, that's where things took a turn. And that's where this deep dive gets really interesting.
Yeah, things definitely took a turn.
So this is where things get complicated. See, at the center of all this controversy is, well, it's Danny Masterson. And, for those who might not know the name, he was on that show, that 70s show.
Right, he played Hyde.
Yeah, Hyde. But more recently, well, he was convicted of rape.
Yeah, and sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Exactly, 30 years, which is, that's huge. And it's his connection to Emily Armstrong that really, like, blew this whole thing up.
Yeah, that's the crux of it, right? So Armstrong, she admitted to being at one of Masterson's early hearings, like back in the day, like in support of him, because, they were friends at the time. But this was like before all the allegations really came out.
Right, but it's still like a choice that's,
Yes.
following her around, right?
For sure. It's definitely cast a long shadow on everything.
Yeah. And then you've got like the whole Scientology factor, right? Because both Masterson and Armstrong, they've been linked to the Church of Scientology. Which, that's a whole other, like, can of worms.
Yeah, and it's a can of worms that we kind of have to open here. Because during Masterson's trial, there was actually testimony about the Church of Scientology, like, pressuring Masterson's accusers, basically trying to stop them from going to the police.
Wow. Okay, so that adds a whole other layer to this.
Definitely adds another layer, even if, like, we don't know the specifics of Armstrong's involvement.
Right, exactly. And then, on top of all this, you have Chester Bennington's family. And, well, their reactions have been, very intense. His son, he went on Instagram and basically accused the band of trying to, like, erase his dad, like, by bringing Armstrong in, especially with all this baggage. He even called it a betrayal, which is, that's a strong word.
Yeah, betrayal really hits hard. And I think it's important to remember, like, Jamie Bennington, he's not just some random fan, This is his dad we're talking about, the guy Emily Armstrong is sort of like replacing.
Yeah.
So for him to say it's a betrayal, that cuts deep.
It definitely does. And it makes you think, like, do family members, do they have a different kind of, like, moral authority in this situation?
It's a tough question, right? Like, whose feelings matter more here? The families, the fans, the bands?
Exactly. And it's not just Jamie. Chester's mom, Susan, she also called it a betrayal. And she even said she's worried the band's, like, rushing to move on, like they're going to push Chester's legacy aside.
And you can't really blame her for feeling that way, right?
Yeah.
Like, their grief is real, and it brings up these really complex questions about legacy.
It does, for sure. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get any more, like, tangled, Cedric Bixler-Zavala, he's the frontman for the Mars Volta, and his wife was actually one of Masterson's victims. Back in 2023, he publicly called out Armstrong and her band Dead Sara.
Yeah, he basically drew this direct line between them and Masterson's crimes.
It's heavy stuff, man.
It really is. And, Bixler-Zavala's statement, it brings in this whole other perspective, right? The victim's perspective.
Yeah, and that's something you can't ignore.
You really can't. It forces everyone to confront the reality of what happened, the pain involved.
It's a lot to process. For sure. So,
Yeah.
like, with all this going on, you got to wonder, like, what did Emily Armstrong have to say about all this?
Well, she did respond eventually.
She did.
Yeah, yeah, on Instagram.
Oh, Instagram before.
On September 13th, she put out this whole statement, addressing the whole thing.
Okay, and what did it say?
Well, there's like a lot to unpack there,
Right.
but I think one of the key things is like she admits she messed up.
Messed up how?
Like by supporting Masterson, she says she like totally misjudged him
Okay.
and that once she knew like the real deal, how bad the allegations were, she cut him off completely.
Right, but I mean, is that enough? Like, just saying you misjudged someone,
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, does it feel genuine?
right, is it real remorse or just, trying to save her own skin?
Exactly. It's tough to say. And even if she is being sincere, like, can you really undo that kind of damage?
Especially with everything else going on.
Yeah, like with Scientology, it's a whole other layer of complication.
It is, because, I mean, even if we take Armstrong at her word,
Right.
like, say she's totally done with Masterson, that doesn't address the Scientology part of it.
Exactly. What's her involvement with them now? That's the big question mark hanging over everything. And, Scientology's track record, especially with like reporting abuse, it makes people nervous.
It does, and it makes this whole situation even harder to, like, wrap your head around.
For sure. And it brings up this even bigger question.
What's that?
Like, should Armstrong's past with Scientology or even her present, should that automatically disqualify her?
From being in Linkin Park, you mean?
Exactly.
That's a tough one.
It really is, because it makes you think about, like, where do we draw the line?
Between an artist's personal life and their art.
Exactly. Like, are some beliefs just, like, a deal breaker?
Can you separate the art from the artist in a situation like this?
These are questions that go way beyond Linkin Park. It's about how we, as a culture, deal with art and artists in this day and age.
It's a big conversation for sure. And I guess, at the end of the day, Linkin Park, as a band, they have the right to choose who they work with.
Yeah, I mean, Brent Smith, he's the singer from Shinedown, he made a statement about it, basically saying fans should respect the band's decision, let them move on. He talked about how, like, fans just want to connect with the music.
Yeah, I get that. But it's just not that simple this time, is it?
Not really. This isn't just about the music anymore. It's about accountability, about the potential for harm, about Chester Bennington's legacy, which, his family clearly feels very strongly about.
So where does that leave us?
Honestly, with more questions than answers, I think.
Yeah.
Like, we still don't know the full story with Armstrong and Scientology.
And who knows if Linkin Park will ever really address any of this.
Right. Like, will they say more or just try to move on?
It's their story to tell, I guess.
Yeah. It is, but the whole thing just makes you think, about legacy, about what we expect from the artists we listen to, about how we move forward when things get messy.
It does, and it makes you wonder, like, can a band like Linkin Park, with such a strong connection to its past, can they ever truly move on from something like this?
That's a tough one.
It is, and it's something I think we're all going to have to grapple with as this story continues to unfold. And this whole situation, it's a lot to unpack, right? We're talking about really heavy stuff. Accusations, apologies, unanswered questions, trying to separate the art from the artist, figuring out where we draw the line. It's a lot, and it's something that makes you think.
It definitely makes you think.
So if you're listening to this and you're a Linkin Park fan, or even if you're just someone trying to make sense of it all, just remember, this is a story that's still being written. There are no easy answers, no right or wrong opinions, just a lot of complex emotions and a whole lot of questions that we're all trying to navigate. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been, it's been a lot. But hey, that's what we do here, right? We dive deep, we ask the tough questions, we try to make sense of it all together. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.